Hello! Today I would like to show you the new fields with ancient vehicle tracks which we found in October 2018. These tracks are not stone which has been worn off by thousands of carts passing daily precisely on the same route by the centimeter, astonishingly enough, as the penguins want us to believe. Some of the obvious reasons for that is that there is no trace of animal hooves, and there could not have been any animals pulling them because they would obviously break their legs on the stone bumps. And of course, obviously, just by looking at the tracks, your cart will get stuck in no time if it is not broken or ready to start with when it even enters the track. With its narrow canals / traps, which are quite deep, turn sharply, and are not even continuous, so you can't even get out. In addition, the tracks turn into staircases now and then, especially when it gets steep. This is not simply a steep segment of the track, it is a proper staircase. Few more staircase steps here as well. And besides everything said so far, whatever left these tracks actually was able to move on very steep, almost vertical boulders. Like for example here. This is how the track looks if one stands on the top of the boulder and looks at it from above. And here the track continues after descending an almost vertical slope. If this was a cart, even a single of these cart acrobatic jumps would have been the last one for sure. Both the segments with the steps and the vertical jump were part of this newly found track, which is merely some 60 kilometers north of Rome. All of these somewhat darker lines are actually unexcavated tracks, as revealed by those short, exposed segments where the stone is bare. And the situation is not much different in many other fields out there on the territory of ancient Etruria, wherever the underlying stone, the base, is somewhat revealed from below the thin blanket of soil. It is just tracks and all kinds of stone cuttings, the purpose of which we can't even guess for now. The good news is that we might have gotten somewhat closer to solving the riddle about that hill, which I showed you in earlier videos from Turkey, which had a couple of strange passages cut in it with vehicle tracks. Not only the purpose of the passages was quite unclear, because tracks were going around the small hill as well, so it wasn't some sort of access, but also on the walls of these passages what looked like scraping marks from the maybe load of the vehicles which were passing. They were going in all directions, not just horizontal. But now I understand that this is nothing else but a couple of short via cavas. And the marks found on the sides are not scraping from the load which was sticking out from the carts, but was from the machines. As shown in this video, at least some of the via cavas in Etruria were excavated by machines, and these machines, they leave exactly this type of marks on the sides. sometimes strictly horizontal, and yet sometimes absolutely chaotic in all directions. So this small cluster of via cavas through that hill in Turkey, they are a typical example of via cavas made by few machines passing after each other. And after this new finding about the machines, I also understand something that I saw always in Turkey, also in Malta, in Spain. Very often the tracks had their own kind of rocket road. And I was always puzzled because it was like a track left in the soft mud or soft stone. A single pair of tracks or just couple of vehicles have passed and have left that trail, and yet it had its own private road, rocket with chisel marks. Maybe not very high, maybe just 20 centimeters high, but still, this type of situation was way too common. And now I understand that simply it's the habit, so to say, of these vehicles. They excavate as they go, or maybe they clean as they go, or they level as they go. What is the most appropriate term, we don't know yet, but something of that sort. These tracks were relatively narrow and also single. They were not in pairs, and they run down a very, very steep forest path. If somebody would try to ride bike or motorbike on this steep path, he would arrive in the river below by a direct flight. As we continued to follow that same path uphill, the single track was visible now and then we saw some rocket ruins along the path. And here it was, our track again, this time on the top of the ruins. We even decided to clean it to be sure that it is the track we've been following, and it was. Now, bear in mind that the stone was much softer when all the rock-cut ruins were made, and the tracks were also left in a relatively soft surface, which later on petrified. So how did the ceiling of these rock-cut rooms hold? Even without vehicles traveling on it, it's some 20-30 centimeters thick only. It would be brave to make such thin ceiling, even when the stone has its current hardness, then what to speak of the times when it was softer? It is really puzzling to me. And in the videos with the results of the Malta expedition, you can see the exactly same situation at Chapman Junction in Malta. And it's not just a room over there, it's something the size of a small concert hall. And even the tracks, the multitude of tracks on the top, they curve and later on enter in that same room. And in Sardinia, I've seen images of exactly the same thing, clusters of tracks directly above the rock-cut rooms. And the thickness of the ceiling is same like here. If it was just one track, one would assume that it is actually for draining water or it is a path marker, but then it goes and joins the field with all the other tracks. And then it becomes clear that it cannot be a path marker because there are fields of them, and not only in one country. And as far as being in general canals for water, that's not possible anyway because they have not been designed for water flow and they cannot contain or transport water for any meaningful distance in any meaningful amount, except of course sometimes in the via cavas. And luckily we've got one more clue which can help us solve the riddle of the tracks. And the clue comes from Spain, the region of Rigumiel de la Sierra, a region with the second highest in the world concentration of dinosaur footprints. Petrified dinosaur footprints along petrified tracks with their own via cava, very low but technically still a via cava. Of course, officially they're dinosaur footprints, but otherwise they can be anything, even footprints of giant penguins. Just imagine how wise are they gonna be when their heads are so enormous, like 5 by 5 meters at the head alone. This is another interesting field with tracks near Viterbo. Particularly interesting at this spot were the historic marks, which closely resemble marks left by our modern tread vehicles. We paid almost no attention to them during the first expedition in this region, just because we automatically dismissed them as modern. And only after we noticed them on forest paths, which are surely inaccessible to any modern tread vehicle, only then we realized that they are actually historic. In the previous episode you can see them climbing on a wall. Here as well, at this segment, they are definitely all over the walls. And also they are similar but not really identical to the modern tread vehicle marks, because the modern vehicles don't really penetrate the stone on the side quite deep, by the way, as the old ones do. At one place in Turkey we saw them side by side with indeed marks left by modern tread vehicles. The modern vehicles, they break the stone. The older marks are very similar, but they are eroded and covered with lichen. More examples of historic tool marks here. Everything besides this black line is historic. The black line is really from a modern vehicle, scraping the middle part of the historic road. So some very interesting tracks here. Something very similar to a modern bicycle track crosses the road and even leaves a mark on its wall. Another track here tries to climb on the sides of the low via cava. Here yet another stray, thin, single, bike-like track. And as we noticed in the other regions with similar track fields, Malta, Spain and Turkey, these vehicles were apparently very well adapted to difficult terrains. Like for example here, the modern road followed the old historic road, but only as long as it was even. You see here the tracks, they turn and they go uphill. But of course there is no modern road uphill as well. Our vehicles cannot cope with such terrain.
The suspension of the historic vehicles was also quite different and far more efficient than ours. This side of the track is much lower than the other. For modern use, we had to add additional gravel to level it out and use the road. But the historic tracks go below the gravel, without affecting the angle of the tracks on the other side, which remained perfectly even.
In case some of you still have the slightest doubt that these tracks could be actually modern, just look at this very deep track and try to imagine how many modern vehicles should have passed this way to cause such a wear on the stone, and then compare that number to the most likely number of vehicles who might have made this turn going into the woods and punching their tires. As you can see, they had to fill it again with gravel so that it becomes suitable for modern use. So far I have been showing you thread-like marks, mostly from the road. They are also there in the wilderness, really lots of them. But since by far most of the tracks in the wilderness are badly overgrown, they are simply not very well visible, and even more so on captured images. Yet another very interesting track consisting of a chain of ellipses. I'm sure that this vehicle or device, whatever left them, was very often used to make the deeper via cavas, because very often that's what exactly we see in the middle, a chain of ellipses. The scratches you see in the middle are also historic. In this segment, all the tool marks you see are historic. In the overgrown areas here and there where the bedrock is exposed, it's the same, scratches and thread-like marks. This, by the way, is a deep and completely overgrown track. A photograph showing how did the streets of Rome actually look like when they were excavating them. And all the way to China as well. And what is to be found next to the historic roads with plenty of thread-like marks? Countless rock-cut steps and more overgrown tracks, and even more thread-like marks just out there in the wild without any track. Here the artificially shaped stone, together with a lot of thread-like marks, they continue all the way to the end of a vertical cliff. And the cliff itself has been also intelligently shaped. The tool marks are visible on the very steep and high wall. In this area we walked on and on for kilometers, and almost anywhere that the old stone would be visible below the carpet of grass, it would be intelligently shaped, either some sort of tracks or rectangular cuttings or simply thread-like marks. This entire region of Etruria is so rich in ruins, it's just unbelievable. Literally anywhere you turn, it will be one ruin on the top of another. Here, if we look up, parts of rock cut rooms on a vertical cliff, and if we look down, just because somebody has lifted the masking veil of the wilderness, the old steps are visible, and sure enough, with their own miniature one-sided via cava. Here in this playlist you can find more information about these very curious tracks in Turkey, Spain, Malta, and America. Even now, some of the rock-cut ruins are used for parking big vehicles. And maybe that was their original use as well.
So far, we know that these were some sort of vehicles that would make their own road as they went along. In addition to that, we found a few spots that suggest that they might have also been used for clearing, or maybe even leveling, entire fields. Also, the length of the marks, shown here on the screen, additionally proved that these are indeed historic marks. We just don't have modern, portable machinery that would leave such long and smooth marks. These bad boys could certainly leave some scratches on the stone, or maybe even break off pieces here and there. But these are not stone-cutting machines. They are made for scooping. And if one wanted to quarry stone, you will have to chop it off with some other, more specialized tool, like an excavator. And then these guys will come and scoop it up. Modern machines which would leave such marks would be some sort of ginormous stone excavators. They would certainly be able to match the length of these cuttings, but not their smoothness and precision. To get these relatively precise edges in a modern environment, we would need the large industrial-based stone-cutting machines that are normally found in factories and plants for processing quarried stone. Such equipment is not found in the fields because the power that they consume can't be supplied by mobile-based generators. There are no industries of any type around this and the other similar fields we have found. It is all via cavas and fields with petrified tracks, with the occasional farming field in between where the petrified tracks calmly rest below their blankets of soil.
The stone walls that you see on the images are all hewn. The chisel-like marks are clearly visible, or excavator marks, we can't say for sure. So the walls are definitely, and all other marks that you see on these images are definitely part of this via cava complex. Indeed, the nearest via cava from this location would be maybe some 50 or 100 meters away. This field alone was rather large, maybe a square kilometer, very approximately, And most of the marks were very, very eroded, but this small segment which I'm showing you most of the time had quite well preserved marks. And again, it would be difficult to make exactly such marks with modern equipment, but probably it wasn't that difficult to make them back then because the surface, the ground was much softer. If you know of any modern vehicle which could leave such long and smooth cuttings in solid bedrock, please kindly submit an image with the marks it leaves on my forum. And this is the second similar patch which we found with identical marks, much smaller though, maybe 30 by 15 meters approximately, somewhat rectangular. It is located on a rather steep slope of municipal land used for herding sheep at the moment. Again, no trace of any industries anywhere around, just lots of via cavas and rock-cut ruins. And looking around in the area, most probably there were many such patches, but they were not so well visible as this one. They were partially covered with soil.
So, apparently, these types of ancient machines were very common. And for some reason, people cleared or leveled lots of their land in this area, around the town of Viterbo in Italy, and Etruria in general, all over the territory of ancient Etruria. Everywhere, these scoop marks, and sled-like tracks, and thread-like tracks. And this is the third similar patch. Again, we found it by chance on the road to rock-cut ruins and via Cavus. It was on a steep patch of private property, so we just took a distant photo. It wasn't any different from the other such patches that we've shown you in the past. At some point, we also spotted this curious, very small hill in the distance. As we got nearer and nearer, the familiar old historic tool marks were there to be seen. Thread-like sequences of dots, or short lines climbing sideways, and then lots of those which are usually called single tracks, or motorbike tracks. But here, they're so steep that we understand that there's no difference between single scoop marks and single tracks sometimes. So, one way of looking at the tracks is to see them as marks left by the scooping machines. But then the question would be, where would the tracks of the machines themselves be? Or if it was some sort of a simple hand-operated device, then where would the pads be, the footprints of the little machines? Because, as we've seen in previous episodes, number one, the Earth's surface was much softer at that time. And two, with such clearly distinguishable left, right footprints of both people and megapenguins.
So, according to the commonly spread concept of history, this type of people built all these ruins. Or if it wasn't actually them, still we could say that they were probably much closer in mentality and lifestyle to the civilization of the rock cutters or the nature people. And although they seem to have quite sophisticated machinery for earthworks, we see the king squatting in some sort of wrinkled canvas tent. with a scarecrow in front of it. Oh, sorry, that would be the flag of the procession, mistake. Was it really like that? What do you think? I personally think that we've got a lot more to learn about the period we call antiquity. These are lake ships found in this very same area. They're dated back to the period of antiquity, possibly because this is some of the decoration that survived. And as far as the ships themselves, the photos is all that is left from them. They burned them. They had it all: giant, luxurious ships, a fleet of terraformation machines, and an intricate system of underground tunnels. This tunnel, for example, we found absolutely by chance, away from any road or even path. It went on for some 50 meters before it was too clogged with soil and stones to follow further. The tunnels we saw, as well as all other rock-cut ruins in Italy and probably all over the world, simply lay out there unexcavated. It is absolutely obvious that the tunnels and the rock-cut ruins are buried. We cannot see them properly, and yet nowhere during the two expeditions we saw any hint that the penguins are interested in studying them. While on the other hand, even in this very short time gap of 2 years since the previous expedition, I could already see the shockingly fast rate by which they are being overgrown by vegetation. And I can't even imagine if we lost that much in 2 years, then how much could have been lost for hundreds of years. The ancient people of Italy had even underground water tunnels for regulating the water levels of entire lakes. This network connected 3 lakes, Nemi, Albano, and another one which is now dry, and had a length of a couple of kilometers. It is not that easy to make wide tunnels connecting the bottoms of their lakes, and everything in this system of tunnels was properly calculated so the drainage could effectively take place. In the article about them, I saw a short remark that there are 12 such systems in the region of Lazio alone, which is not even a big region, but I wonder how relevant this number could be when we see unexcavated tunnels. Means nobody has even bothered to check what are they all about, and also the rock-cut ruins, the dwellings, they tend to be interconnected with tunnels as well. So when they're not excavated, then how do we know that there aren't even more tunnels? Not only they controlled the water levels of the natural lakes, they were truly masters of terraformation. They were also making their own lakes. I noticed this one by the chance on the map when I was looking for hotels. I was impressed by its really elegant and perfect shape, and without even knowing its name, I already knew this is historic. Our people made this. And sure enough, immediately I checked and even the penguins accepted. A similar matching design on the island of Sardinia. And by the way, along the coastal line of the entire island, as well as mainland Italy, lies an impressive network of old channels in the absolutely same style as those mysterious ports around America and probably all around the world. Surely it's there in places of Siberia as well. So we have a system of ports, quite an impressive one, worldwide network, not very old. So who made that? Surely they are connected to what I've been calling old world ruins. The only thing related to that would be the grid of lines all around the world, which also seem to be somewhat recent, definitely historic, but not so old. It's quite puzzling. Who made all that? And in general, why should we put any faith in the words of the penguins if they don't show any endeavor at all to study the historic sites on which their so called history should be based?